Milken Institute 2013 Global Conference, sitting down with Niall Ferguson. He is Lawrence A. Tisch Professor of History at Harvard. He has an upcoming book, The Great Regeneration. Thank you for sitting down with us. Let's revisit something that you've talked about in technological terms. You talked about killer apps. These apps that the U.S. had downloaded and used and then weren't doing as well with, while other countries like China had downloaded them and were seeing success with them. I hope I didn't slaughter your whole thesis, but where are we now with the U.S. and China and their app usage?
Well, just to be clear what I'm
yes.
talking about, I mean, not only the United States, but Europe, if you go back centuries, had a series of ideas and institutions that the rest of the world didn't have, like competition, like the scientific revolution, the rule of law based on private property rights, modern medicine, the consumer society, and the work ethic. And these things essentially arose in the West, and the rest of the world didn't really have them, and that's why the West got so much richer than everybody else. And then, beginning with Japan, and now more recently China, the rest of the world has downloaded the killer apps. They've essentially copied the institutions and ideas that worked for the West. And at the same time, we seem to be deleting ours. So we're less competitive, we're getting less good at science, our legal system is not what it was, and so forth. So I think that's the story of our time. And this is why we're experiencing a great degeneration, while the rest of the world is kind of catching up. They're regenerating. Now, where are we with this?
Yes.
I've just been in China, and so
Yes.
I can give you an update report.
Well, give us
After
an update,
a month in China, I
yes,
have
what
to
we
tell you,
hear is about the growth slowing in China, probably needfully, because
Yeah.
many argue there needs to be a rebalancing. So what's it like on the ground?
Well, of course, growth is supposed to slow, and
Yeah.
the Chinese are not taken by surprise. Their whole ambition is to transition from an export-led model to one that's domestically driven. That wasn't going to happen overnight.
Right.
The interesting thing in China is the debate on the rule of law. As I said, that's one of the killer apps of Western civilization.
Right.
Rule of law based on clear private property rights, an independent judiciary, courts you can trust.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have that
Yeah.
in mainland China. They have it in Hong Kong, but the rest of China, really the rule of law scarcely exists in a Western sense. There isn't an independent judiciary. There are hardly any lawyers. There are only about 200,000 lawyers in the whole of China.
Well,
And
we
that's
can
the
give
big
them some
debate.
of ours from the U.S.
We
We've
have
got
too
plenty.
many. Right, we have too many,
Yeah.
but they have too few. And that's interesting because that's the hot button debate in Beijing right now. How can we get to the rule of law? It's not a debate about democracy, it's a debate about law.
Do you think that they're moving towards that?
I think the theory is there. It's there in the speeches. The new leadership, President Xi Jinping, has spoken out very clearly on, for example, corruption, which is something that the public in China cares a heck of a lot about.
Okay.
But it's hard to get to the rule of law if you don't have a well-developed judiciary, if you don't have a tradition of rule of law. And that's something that is going to take years. It's going to require an evolution rather than something that can happen in just a few weeks.
And one of the problems that the U.S. faces with high debt in both the public and private sectors is something that China is beginning to face. They're having growing debt levels in both arenas. How concerned are you about that trajectory?
I think there's a serious issue in the local government debt area. That's part of a wider problem of shadow banking. China's economy's kept growing despite credit tightening by the central bank and the major banks. And that's because a whole series of other institutions has evolved to create credit. And the local governments have played a very big part in this, using off-balance sheet vehicles to keep, for example, investment in real estate and property development going. At some point, that's going to overreach. Some of these institutions are going to get into difficulties. We may even see that this year or next year. I've heard that from some very influential sources. So watch out for a small, I call it small China crisis in the course of the next 12 to 24 months.
So in the next 12 to 24 months, who do you see doing better in that period, and then over the long term, looking at the U.S. and China?
Well, China's going to do better. I mean, even 7.5% or 7.7% growth is something we would kill for.
But they could have some kind of hard landing in the process.
I think hard landing is the wrong term.
Okay.
That's been bandied about last year.
By the
People
financial
talked about
media.
A lot of people in the financial media, I don't blame you personally, let me be clear, do sometimes make it sound as if China's going to implode.
Right.
That's not going to happen. Take it from me. The thing that is going to happen is there will be some kind of correction, maybe a shakeout in local government finance. Some institutions are going to go bust. That's going to get a lot of coverage. I predict that in maybe a year from now, you're going to be running headlines on China crisis, and everybody's going to get very excited. I don't think it's going to be that massive. It's certainly not going to be China's subprime, because it's not such a leveraged system. But there is going to be some kind of correction in that shadow banking area, and that's going to be interesting to watch. But I don't think it takes China's growth rate down massively.
Okay.
I think this is all, if you'll forgive the expression, part of the 5-year plan, part of the plan.
Okay, fine. Long term, who are you more bullish on, the US or China?
Well, long term, China has all kinds of problems. Demographic problems, environmental problems, which are really pretty horrendous at the moment. So long term, if we're talking over the next 20, 30, 40 years, I'm quite bullish US. And I'm quite anxious about how China is going to manage its transition to rule of law. The energy revolution is something that makes the US look good. There are many parts of this country that are already recovering strongly, from Utah to Texas to the Dakotas. Yeah. But I'm nervous about whether the US is going to blow its opportunity. I'm nervous about what Washington is doing. I'm nervous about those states like Illinois, which seem to be self-destructing. I see an opportunity being frittered away here because of excessive regulation and too many lawyers. The problem of over-lawyered a society where you've got not the rule of law, but the rule of lawyers.
We'll send some to China, call it a day. Thank you so much, Professor.
My pleasure.